Bet I don't know about you, but I'm pretty sure that was a Bigfoot. This story comes to us from high in the Rocky Mountains. Wally, a long-haul semi-driver, encountered a creature unlike anything he had seen before and came away with this amazing tale. This is that story. Now, I know that you've heard stories like this before, but I've got no reason to lie about it, so here it goes. My name is Wally Thompson, and at the time this happened, I was 48 years old with more than 2 decades of experience driving 8-wheelers across the American West. I had logged hundreds of thousands of miles on I-70 alone, through blizzards that turned the highway into a white tunnel of swirling snow, slides that blocked entire lanes for days, construction zones that narrowed the road to a single lane with concrete barriers on both sides, and the occasional herd of elk or deer that decided the highway was their personal crossing. I thought I had seen it all. I was wrong in ways I could never have imagined. It was the first week of October, and the Rocky Mountains were showing off in their finest autumn colors. The aspens along the lower and middle slopes had turned to brilliant gold, shimmering like millions of coins whenever the wind moved through. Their leaves, higher up near the timberline, the evergreens stood dark and stoic, their deep green a perfect contrast to the fiery reds and oranges of the changing foliage. The air was crisp and clean, carrying the sharp scent of pine resin, the earthy smell of damp soil and fallen leaves, and the faint metallic promise of the winter snows that would soon blanket the high passes and turn the landscape into a frozen wonderland. I was on a long haul coming from the western slope into Denver on I-70, hauling a heavy load of industrial machinery components, specialized tools, and precision equipment for a manufacturing plant near the city. The truck sat noticeably low on its suspension under the weight, and I knew from experience that the climbs would be slow grinds in low gear, while the descents would require constant vigilance and careful brake management to avoid overheating the drums or discs. I drive mostly in the afternoons to late night before the time runs out, so I catch the sunset nearly every night. There is something deeply satisfying and almost spiritual about watching the sun sink behind the jagged, snow-dusted peaks, the sky exploding in shades of orange, pink, magenta, and deep purple that no photograph or painting can ever quite capture with full justice. The shadows stretch long and dramatic across the valleys and meadows, and then the darkness comes quickly once the sun disappears. Deeper and more complete than anything you experience in the flatlands or even in the foothills. On this particular evening, everything felt routine at first. The big diesel engine hummed its familiar, comforting song. The radio played classic rock and old country that faded in and out depending on the terrain and the position of the mountains, and my battered stainless steel thermos of strong black coffee sat within easy reach in the cup holder. I was looking forward to delivering the load, completing my paperwork, and perhaps enjoying a hot meal at a decent diner, followed by a real shower and a bed that did not move with the motion of the road. The first week of October is always a beautiful time to drive through the mountains. Tourist traffic has thinned considerably after Labor Day. The days are still pleasantly warm at the lower elevations, and the nights carry a refreshing chill that keeps a driver alert without being dangerously cold. I had made decent time despite the heavy load and the constant monitoring of my hours of service, and I was determined to push through Vail, pass and reach the Denver area before my available driving time expired for the day. My brakes had been a little soft and spongy on previous descents during this particular trip. Not dangerously so, but noticeable enough to you. I had made a mental note to have them inspected and serviced once I reached the terminal in Denver. Still, I-70 is a well-traveled and well-maintained road, with good signage, frequent chain-up and pull-out areas, and those crucial runaway ruck ramps for drivers who lose control on the steep grades. I told myself I would be extra careful, watch my temperatures, and make it through without incident. We had gotten dark, and I mean very dark. The mountains take away the light that much more. The high peaks block any lingering glow from the western horizon. and without a moon or significant starlight filtering through, the world beyond the reach of my headlights was an inky, impenetrable void. I kept my high beams on wherever it was safe to do so, constantly scanning the tree lines, the shoulders, and the road ahead for any sign of wildlife. Deer and elk are extremely common in this area, especially during the fall when they are moving between feeding grounds and preparing for enter, and a collision with a large animal at highway speed can destroy a rig, cause serious injury, and end a career or a life in a matter of seconds. I had seen the aftermath of such accidents before, and I had no desire to become another statistic. I had gotten to the bottom of a long, winding downgrade and had let off the brakes to accelerate and build momentum towards the upgrade that I knew lay ahead. The engine worked hard, the transmission shifting with smooth precision as I built speed for the coming climb. The heavy load behind me shifted slightly with the change in momentum, the straps, chains, and tarps creaking and groaning in the trailer as the weight redistributed. Everything was normal, routine, the kind of moment I had experienced thousands of times over the years, until it was not. All of a sudden, and I mean as fast as lightning, something ran out in front of my rig from the right-hand side of the road. It emerged from the darkness between the trees like a shadow that had suddenly gained mass and terrible purpose. It was big, impossibly, unnaturally big, for anything that should be crossing a major interstate highway at night in the middle of nowhere. My headlights caught it for only a fraction of a second as it crossed into my path, but that frozen moment was enough to burn the image into my brain forever. It was running upright on two powerful legs, its long, muscular arms pumping in rhythm with its stride like a human sprinter, its head held slightly forward as if it were focused entirely on reaching the other side of the highway before being seen. The body was covered in shaggy, dark fur that seemed to absorb the light from my headlights rather than reflect it back, giving it an almost ghostly quality against the blacktop. There was no time to swerve, no time to hit the air horn, no time to do anything but grip the wheel tighter and brace for the inevitable act. The collision was tremendous and sickening. The front of the semi slammed into the creature with a deep, meaty thud that I felt through the steering wheel, the floorboards, and the sea. Beneath me, metal crumpled and tore, plastic and fiberglass shattered into pieces, and the entire 80,000-pound rig lurched violently upward and to the left before settling back down with a bone-jarring crash. I stomped on the brake pedal with everything I had, feeling the ABS system pulse and chatter beneath my boot as the tires fought for purchase. On the asphalt. The truck bounced once, twice, then snarled and shuddered to a stop with the air brakes hissing loudly in the sudden, eerie silence that followed. Load. The animal had rolled off to the passenger side, tumbling and scraping along the fender and door before coming to rest some distance ahead in the shoulder of the road. For several long seconds I sat there gripping the wheel with white-knuckled hands, my heart hammering against my ribs like it was trying to escape, trying to understand what had just happened. Had I hit a moose? An elk? A very large black bear? The impact had been too solid, too heavy, too high for a typical deer. The cab was noticeably off-kilter, tilted slightly from the force of the collision or the way the frame had twisted on impact. The passenger door was caved in and completely unusable, the metal folded inward like crumpled aluminum foil. I unbuckled my seatbelt with shaking hands and tried the driver's door. It was jammed tight from the impact. I had to kick it repeatedly with both feet, the metal groaning and protesting before finally giving way with a loud metallic screech. I climbed down from the cab into the cold night air, my boots hitting the gravel shoulder with a crunch. The temperature had dropped significantly with the elevation and the advancing hour, and I could see my breath fogging in front of my face. I could smell diesel fuel, hot metal from the damaged engine compartment, coolant leaking from the punctured radiator, and beneath it all, strange, musky animal odor that reminded me of a wet dog mixed with rich earth, pine needles, and something else I could not quite identify. Something wild and primal. I walked around to the front of the truck and felt my stomach drop into my boots. The entire front grille and both headlight assemblies were completely gone, ripped away by the force of the impact. The bumper hung at a crazy, drunken angle, and the hood was dented and pushed back toward the windshield. Long strands of coarse, dark hair were stuck to the remaining pieces of the fender, the door, and even the side mirror where the animal had, rolled and scraped against the rig during its tumble. This was not deer hair or elk hair. It was longer, thicker, and wirier, more like the pelt of a large primate or some kind of bear from a nightmare than anything native to two. Hazy Colorado mountains. I turned my attention to what I had struck. It lay in a dark, motionless heap about 20 yards ahead, partially on the paved shoulder and partially in the grass and low brush at the edge of the tree line. I retrieved my heavy-duty flashlight from the cab and walked toward it slowly, my boots crunching on the gravel and then the grass. As I approached, I could see that it was still breathing. The massive chest rose and fell in shallow, gasping, irregular movements, and there was a wet, labored, almost wheezing sound to each breath. It was not moving otherwise, just lying there in a tangled mass of limbs and matted, bloody fur. At first, in the harsh beam of the flashlight, I thought it was a bear, a very large black bear that had perhaps been hit by another vichia, cull earlier in the evening, or was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. But as I walked carefully around to the head and shone the light directly on its face, my breath caught in my throat and a cold chill ran down my spine. This was no bear. The proportions were all wrong for any bear I had ever seen or heard of. The body was too elongated and barrel-chested, the arms too long and disturbingly human-like in their structure. And the way they lay, the shoulders too broad and powerfully built. The head was large and rounded, with a pronounced heavy brow ridge that cast deep shadows over the closed eyes. The snout was short and relatively flat, not elongated like a bear's muzzle. Even covered in blood, dirt, and matted fur, the face had a disturbingly humanoid quality. Thick lips parted slightly, a broad and flat chin, and a jawline that suggested both immense strength and something eerily, unsettlingly familiar. I stepped back so quickly, I almost tripped over my own feet and fell. My mind reeled and spun, trying to reject what my eyes were telling me. Bigfoot? Sasquatch? Yeti? Those were stories told around campfires, featured in blurry photographs from the 1960s, and sensationalized in late-night television specials and internet videos. They were not something you encountered on a well-traveled interstate highway in the middle of Colorado. And yet there it was, lying broken and bleeding on the side of I-70 because I had hit it squarely with my 80,000-pound semi-truck. The realization hit me with almost as much physical force as the initial collision had. My hands were shaking so badly that the flashlight beam danced across the creature's body. I ran back toward the cab, my flashlight beam swinging wildly across the ground, and tried to call 911 on my cell phone with fingers that looked thick and clumsy. The call connected for a few precious seconds, long enough for me to report the accident, give my location as best I could, and mention too, I had struck a very large animal. But then the signal dropped completely. The high passes, deep canyons, and sheer rock walls of the Rockies are notorious for creating dead zones in cell phone coverage. And tonight, the mountains were not cooperating. I tried again and again, moving around the truck and even climbing up onto the step to get higher, but there was nothing. In the distance, however, I could hear the faint but growing wail of sirens cutting through the cold night air. Emergency services were already on their way, probably alerted by another driver who had seen my stopped rig with its hazards flashing, or had heard the tremendous impact from farther down the road. I was not that far from the next town, and professional help would arrive soon. I just had to hold on and keep the scenes secure. I walked back to the creature and stood a respectful but watchful distance away, my flashlight trained steadily on its still form. It was still breathing, though each gasp seemed more labored and shallow than the last. Dark blood had pooled beneath its body, glistening black-red in the artificial light and soaking into the gravel and grass. The fur was heavily matted and soaked, revealing patches of pale skin underneath that looked vulnerable and almost human. One leg was twisted at an unnatural angle that made my own stomach turn just looking at it. and there was a deep, ugly laceration along its left side and rib cage where the truck had likely struck it with the most force. Despite the terrible injuries, the sheer size of the thing was staggering and impossible to ignore. Even lying down in a heap, it was longer than I was tall, and I guessed that if it ever managed to stand fully upright, it would tower over me by at least 2 or 3 feet, making me feel like a child next to it. My flashlight beam could not illuminate its entire length at once. The darkness at the edges seemed to actively swallow the light, as if the creature itself were absorbing it. All I could think in that moment was a desperate, repeating plea. Please do not run off until someone gets here, or no one will believe me. I wanted a witness. I wanted official confirmation. I wanted proof that I was not losing my mind from years of driving alone, from too much caffeine and too little real sleep, or that this was not some elaborate hallucination brought on by fatigue and the isolation of the road. I kept the light steady on the creature and waited, my heart still racing, my breath visible as white clouds in the cold mountain air. My ears were straining for the sound of approaching sirens. Just as the sheriff's cruiser finally pulled up behind my truck, its red and blue emergency lights painting the entire scene in alternating washes of color that made the shadows dance and jump, I turned back to check on the creature one more time. What I saw made my blood run cold all over again and sent a fresh surge of adrenaline through my already exhausted system. It was trying to get up. With visible, agonizing effort and obvious intense pain, it had pushed itself up onto its knees and then onto one powerful arm, the other arm. Emma clutched tightly against its injured side as if trying to hold itself together. Its head hung low between its shoulders, and I could hear a low, rumbling, guttural moan escape its throat, a sound of pure suffering that made the hair on my arm stand up. It was up on its legs and one arm, the other bracing against the ground for support, its massive body swaying slightly as it fought with Eve, wreathing it had left to rise. The matted, bloody hair covered a frame that was powerfully built beyond anything I had ever seen, with muscles that still rippled and bunched beneath the fur even in its weakened and injured state. My flashlight still could not light up the entire creature at once. It was simply too large for the beam to encompass. I estimated it at close to 9 feet tall if it ever managed to stand fully upright, and easily 400 to 500 pounds or more of solid muscle and bone. The sheriff, a stocky, no-nonsense man in his late 40s with a weathered face and the calm demeanor of someone who had seen his share of highway accidents, climbed out of his cruiser with one hand resting on the butt of his holstered service weapon. "What happened here?" he called out as he approached cautiously, his eyes taking in the damaged truck and the dark shape on the ground. Before I could even begin to answer, the night was split by a sound that I will carry with me to my grave. It was a shocking, blood-curdling scream that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. It started deep in the creature's chest as a low, guttural animal roar, and then rose into a high, piercing, almost human shriek filled with agony, rage, fear, and something ancient and wild that bypassed all rational thought and spoke directly to the oldest parts of the brain. The sound echoed and re-echoed off the mountain walls, through the trees and across the valley, bouncing back on itself until it felt as the tinnitus, or the entire forest and the mountains themselves were screaming in pain and warning. I felt the hair on the back of my neck and arms stand straight up, and a primal, instinctive fear gripped my chest so tightly I could barely breathe. The sheriff drew his service weapon instantly, his flashlight sweeping in wide arcs across the trees, the shoulder, and the dark shape that was no longer there. He ran toward the spot where the creature had been lying only moments before, but it was gone. In the few seconds we had been distracted by the arrival of the cruiser, by the scream, and by each other, the animal had found the strength to push itself fully upright and disappear into the dense forest and underbrush that bordered the highway. There was a clear and obvious trail of broken branches, crushed and flattened underbrush, and dark droplets of blood leading from the shoulder or into the trees, but the creature itself had vanished completely into the darkness as if it had never been there. The sheriff swept his flashlight back and forth across the tree line, calling out commands in a loud, authoritative voice. But there was no answer except the fading, dying echo of that terrible, soul-shaking scream. Backup units arrived shortly after, along with the heavy tow truck I had requested through my dispatch. The tow driver, a grizzled, weathered man who told me he had been in the business for more than 25 years and had seen just about everything, took one long, appraising look at the front end of my Freightliner Cascadia and let out a low, impressed whistle. "I've seen a lot of animal strikes in my time on these roads," he said, shaking his head slowly as he walked around the damaged rig. "Deer, elk, even a couple of moose and one very unfortunate black bear, but nothing like this. This looks like you went head-to-head with a small car, or maybe a boulder the size of a refrigerator. What in the hell did you actually hit out here?" I told him the truth, exactly as I had experienced it. He listened without laughing or rolling his eyes, spat a long stream of tobacco juice onto the pavement, and nodded slowly. "Well," he said after a long moment, "these mountains have secrets that go back a long time before any of us were born. I've heard stories over the years from other drivers who run these routes. Strange things seen on dark nights, sounds that don't belong to, any animal we know, tracks that don't match anything in the books. Most folks chalk it up to tiredness, too much coffee, or an overactive imagination after too many hours alone. But sometimes you wonder if there's more out there than we want to admit." He helped hook up the rig with professional efficiency, and we began the slow, careful process of getting the damaged semi off the highway and to a repair facility down in the valley. The sheriff took my full, detailed statement while we waited for the tow to be completed. I described everything I could remember in as much detail as possible: the size and upright posture of the creature, the way it had been run, across the road, the facial features I had seen in the flashlight beam, the way it had struggled to its feet despite obvious catastrophe, injuries, and the blood-curdling scream that had echoed through the mountains. He was professional, thorough, and polite, asking clarifying questions and writing everything down in his notebook. But since he had not seen the creature himself before it fled into the trees, and since there was no body or physical evidence left at the I-70, seen beyond some blood and disturbed vegetation, the official report listed the incident simply as a collision with an unidentified large Moiho-Seni Oamband. Amal. I understood his difficult position completely. Without physical evidence, photographs, or a second credible witness claiming that you hit a Bigfoot with your semi-truck on a major inters. Tate sounds like the ravings of a man who had been driving too long without proper rest. I did not argue with him. I simply told my story and hoped that someday someone would believe it. In the days, weeks, and months that followed that night, I replayed the events over and over in my mind, sometimes unable to sleep because images were so vivid. I wished, more than I can possibly express in words, that I had thought to collect a sample of the long, coarse hair that had been stewed, checked to my truck, or to take several clear photographs of the creature while it lay there injured, or even to scoop up some of the pooled blue, from the ground into a container before the scene was disturbed by emergency vehicles. But in the shock of the moment, with adrenaline flooding my system and the very real fear that this massive unknown creature might suddenly wake up and attack me, those practical, evidence-gathering thoughts never occurred to me. We simply did not think like that back then. Smartphones with good cameras existed, but the immediate instinct in an accident situation was to call for help, secure the scene, and make sure everyone was safe, not to document potential evidence for a cryptozoology research paper or a skeptical scientific community. The truck required extensive and expensive repairs. The front end was essentially destroyed, the radiator was punctured, and there was significant frame and suspension damage that kept it out of service for several weeks. I arranged for the load to be transferred to another driver who could complete the delivery, and I made my way to Denver by rental car and then by bus, my mind still spinning and my nerves raw. I told a few close friends and a couple of trusted fellow drivers what had actually happened that night on Vail Pass. Some laughed it off as an elaborate tall tale or suggested I had hit a bear and the darkness and shock had played tricks on my mind. Others listened quietly without interrupting, and then, after a long pause, shared stories of their own strange encounters on lonely highways. Unexplained lights hovering over remote roads, eerie sounds coming from the woods at night, large tracks that did not match any known point. Nymal and glimpses of tall, dark shapes moving just beyond the reach of headlights. I began to research the topic on my own time during layovers and downtime, reading books by respected researchers, articles from outdoor mags, zines, and even academic papers on the history of Sasquatch sightings across North America and particularly in the Rocky Mountain region. I learned that credible reports of large, bipedal, hair-covered creatures in the high country were far more common than I had ever realized, and that many of them came from people who had as much to lose as I did by going public with their stories. To this day, more than 15 years later, I can still see that creature in perfect detail in my mind's eye whenever I close my eyes and think about that night, the way it lay gasping and broken on the cold shoulder of I-70, the intelligence and unmistakable pain in its deep set eyes when it finally turned its head and looked directly at me, the terrifying primal power of its scream as it fled into the dark forest, and the sheer impossible size of it as it rose up on one arm and its powerful legs. I know with absolute certainty what I hit that night. It was not a bear. It was not a moose or an elk or any other known animal that belongs in these mountains. It was something that, according to everything we are taught in school and by science about the natural world, should not exist. And yet, it does exist, and it walks these forests when it thinks no one is watching. If you ever find yourself driving through Vail Pass or any of the other high mountain passes on I-70 on a dark autumn or winter night, I urge you to keep your eyes on the edges of the road and the dark tree line beyond your headlights. Watch for movement that does not look quite right. Listen for sounds that do not belong to the wind or to any animal you can name. The mountains are ancient, and they keep their secrets well, secrets that predate highways, trucks, and the modern world by thousands of years. But sometimes those secrets grow bold or careless or simply unlucky, and they step out of the shadows and into the harsh light of your head. Lights for one fateful moment. When that happens, all you can do is hold on tight, survive the impact, tell your story to anyone who will listen, and hope that someone believes you, or at least does not laugh you out of the room. To give you a fuller picture of the man behind this story, Wally Thompson was not some wide-eyed newcomer to the road or someone prone to ites of fancy. He had grown up in a working-class family in western Colorado, the son of a mechanic and a schoolteacher. From a young age, he had been fascinated by big machines and the freedom of the open road. After high school, he worked odd jobs before getting his commercial driver's license and never looked back. Over the years, he had driven everything from flatbeds to reefers to tankers, hauling everything from produce to hazardous materials to heavy equipment. He had been married once, briefly, to a woman who could not tolerate the long absences and the unpredictable schedule. They had parted on relatively good terms, and he had stayed in touch with his 2 grown children, though their lives had taken them far from the mountains he loved. The truck was his home, his office, and his sanctuary. He knew every rest stop, every good diner, every tricky curve and steep grade on his regular routes. He had seen sunrises over the Great Plains, thunderstorms rolling across the deserts, and blizzards that made the world disappear. He considered himself a practical man, grounded in the realities of diesel engines, load weights, hours of service regulations, and the constant battle against fatigue. That is what made his encounter so profoundly unsettling. He had no framework, no category, no prior belief system that could comfortably contain what he had seen that night on Vail Pass. In the years since the incident, Wally has become something of a quiet expert on the subject of Sasquatch sightings in the Rocky Mountains. He has read every credible book he could find, corresponded with researchers who treat the topic with scientific rigor rather than sensation, ableism, and even attended a couple of low-key conferences where eyewitnesses could share their experiences without fear of ridicule. He has never gone out looking for the creature himself. He says the mountains are their home, and he has no desire to disturb them further. But he keeps his eyes and ears open whenever he is on the road. He has spoken privately with other long-haul drivers who have had their own unsettling experiences in remote areas, and he has come to believe that these beings are real, intelligent, and far more widespread than most people would ever guess. He no longer fears ridicule the way he once did. "I've already lived through the worst thing that could happen," he told me once over coffee at a truck stop. "I hit one with my truck. After that, what does it matter what anyone thinks?" The physical evidence from that night was frustratingly fleeting. By the time the tow truck had the rig hooked up and ready to move, the blood on the shoulder had been tracked over by emergency vehicles and was already drying into the gravel. The hair that had been caught on the truck was lost during the repair process or blown away by the mountain wind. No footprints were officially documented, though Wally swears he saw several large, human-like impressions in the soft ground leading into two trees before the scene was trampled. The creature itself, of course, was long gone, presumably nursing its injuries deep in the wilderness where humans rarely venture. Whether it survived or not remains unknown, and that uncertainty has weighed on Wally for years. "I didn't mean to hurt it," he has said more than once. "It just came out of nowhere. I hope it made it." For those who have never driven the high mountain passes of Colorado at night, it is difficult to convey just how isolating and otherworldly the experience can be. The road becomes a narrow ribbon of asphalt, suspended between towering rock walls and sheer drop-offs. The trees crowd close on either side, their branches sometimes arching over the highway like a tunnel. Sound behaves strangely, muffled one moment and echoing the next. Your own headlights feel small and inadequate against the vast darkness pressing in from all sides. It is easy to understand how something could live in those forests for decades without ever being properly documented. The terrain is rugged, the climate harsh, and the human presence is limited to a thin ribbon of highway and the occasional pullout or scenic overlook. There are thousands upon thousands of square miles of wilderness where a large, intelligent, reclusive primate could easily remain hidden for all but the most determined searchers. Wally's story stands as one of the more compelling modern encounters because of who he is and what he was doing when it happened. He was not out in the woods at night with a camera or a group of enthusiasts. He was not trespassing or provoking anything. He was simply doing his job, driving a well-maintained truck on a public highway, minding his own business. The creature, for whatever reason, chose that moment to cross the road in front of him. The collision was accidental on both sides, a tragic intersection of two worlds that are not supposed to meet. And yet they did meet, with lasting consequences for at least one of them. I have told this story many times now, and each time I do, I am struck by how consistent Wally remains in the details, even years later. The size, the posture, the facial features, the sound of the scream, the way it rose up on one arm, none of it has changed or grown embellished with retelling. That consistency, combined with his background as a no-nonsense professional driver with nothing to gain from fabricating such a tale, is what makes me believe him. Whether you believe in Bigfoot or not, Wally Thompson's encounter on Vail Pass deserves to be heard and remembered. It is a reminder that our world still holds surprises, that the maps are not quite complete, and that sometimes the things we dismiss as ends have a way of stepping out of the trees and into our lives when we least expect it. So the next time you are driving through the mountains at night and you see something large move in your peripheral vision, pay attention. Slow down if you can. And if you are very unlucky, or perhaps very lucky, you might catch a glimpse of something that will change the way you see the world forever. Just try not to hit it with your truck. Some stories are better told from a distance, around a warm campfire, with the stars overhead and the safe knowledge that whatever is out there, in the darkness is staying there, at least for tonight. Thanks for listening to this episode of Bigfoot Campfire Stories. I'm Reverend Jeff, and may the Squatch be with you wherever your travels take you. Drive safe out there on those dark mountain roads, Keep your eyes and your mind open, and remember that this world is still full of mysteries, wonders, and terrors waiting to be discovered, or to discover us when we least expect it. Until next time, keep your campfires burning bright and your stories strange. Good night.